This video contains subjects of illegal substances, sexual abuse, and self-harm. Please skip if you are not in the right mindset for these topics.
If you would like to listen to the first-hand accounts of a child actor turned self-proclaimed rock star with the moves of Michael Jackson, try to convince us all that every negative thing we've ever heard about him is either untrue or not his fault, then this is the audiobook for you. Read by the man himself with plenty of cringy voices.
You should go to the pharmacy. I had a lot of caffeine today. You should have seen the last boyfriend. Well, he's had an accident. He broke his leg. Oh, hi, Corey.
And the dramatic composition of a student fresh out of her creative writing class. This book is more convoluted than my intro. Hello, everybody. Welcome back to my channel. I'm Lady Candic, and today I wanted to bring you a slightly different type of video because I want to try deep dives. This video was intended to be a deep dive on Corey Feldman, but I discovered that he wrote a memoir, and I thought, what better way to understand him and his childhood than to hear it in his own words. So instead of this being a deep dive, it's actually just going to be a review of that book because there was a lot to talk about just in the book alone, and I still want to do a deep dive maybe in my next video. If you end up liking this one, just let me know so I know to continue my research on Corey Feldman. So throughout the later parts of the book, Corey describes how hard it was to find success without it being the two Coreys. For those of you who don't know, the two Coreys are Corey Feldman and a Canadian actor named Corey Haim. They were often paired together in things like License to Drive and The Lost Boys. I found 12 productions that they were in together. Their constant pairings and friendship evolved into their brand, and they became known together as the two Coreys, and they even had a reality show named The Two Coreys. Anyway, he describes one of his goals as wanting to find success without it being the two Coreys. So please tell me why the entire intro of this book is about Corey Haim's death. The very publicized event and the aftermath is what Corey used as his hook in the intro, and I find that very ironic. He coupled that with so much name dropping. Just in the intro alone, I counted 31 celebrity names like Khloe Kardashian, Whitney Houston, Robert Downey Jr., Lindsay Lohan, Ashton Kutcher, and you would think that sounds exciting, like you're gonna get some good tea on these celebrities, but that's not the case at all. The name drops are more like, I once walked by a hotel that was having a party that Robert Downey Jr. was invited to. Like, it adds nothing. It gives us no tea. It feels like it's just throwing as many celebrity names into it as possible to get you interested. You kind of feel robbed instead. So we move into the first few chapters, and it describes his life as a young child growing up with a mother that has substance abuse problems and an unreliable father. He did have grandparents that gave him some form of stability, but not enough to protect him from a life of moralless adults and disappointment. Although these adults made Corey feel like the disappointment, especially when he wasn't making them any money. How dare you, as an 8-year-old, not financially support your whole family, Corey? Like, what the hell? Although Corey has grown to make his own mistakes, and I do plan to point some of them out, there is no denying that the way he was treated by his family, mainly his mother, gave him a very unfair disadvantage to developing into a well-rounded adult. Aside from some belt spankings by his dad, which a lot of us older people have experienced, most of his abuse was mental and sexual. He was often made to feel like he wasn't talented enough, wasn't a good dancer, wasn't skinny enough. His mom even gave him diet pills that he would eventually start selling to his classmates. Even though he was appearing in many commercials and productions from a very early age, he was still an outcast at his school. His first female conquest gives us a glimpse into who he was as a person at that time and his social standings at school. The first conquest was a girl named Leanne, and he actually liked her friend Amanda, but he lost at a game of rock, paper, scissors with his friend, so his friend got to hang out with Amanda, and he was stuck with Leanne. They hung out, but he wasn't really interested in her, so they didn't do anything. But the next day at school, he had an epiphany. Let's just hear it in his own words.
I decided to rethink things with Leanne. I wasn't sure if I had liked her, but I felt like a shoo-in. Better to start off with a sure thing, I thought, than to graduate to a girl like Amanda once I had some experience under my belt.
There is so much about that I don't like, but he was like 12, so whatever. He goes on to say that he asked her out and got rejected. But he says she secretly said yes. According to all of his classmates and everybody else, she said no, but he says she secretly said yes. This could be a true story, but because he's constantly trying to explain away every negative experience and twist our minds, I'm suspicious every time I hear something like this. Shortly after this experience, he wraps up the filming of Gremlins, and then immediately after films for Friday the 13th, and those two movies premiere within a month of each other. During this time, he says that he was stealing money daily from his grandfather to hang out at the movie theaters all day. When I first heard him say that he was stealing money every day from his grandfather, I was like, wow, Corey, did you have any kind of moral compass? But then I realized he had been in lots of commercials and movies up to this point, and his caregivers were all living off that income. It seems like he got very little reward for the work that he put in. I don't condone theft by any means, but I'm really not mad at this one. He took the money he earned to go see the films that he appeared in. He shouldn't even have to pay for it, honestly, but because he did, at least the money that he took was money that he put in their pockets. Can you imagine how confusing that would be as a preteen who is a major box office star in multiple movies, still being treated as a nobody and an outcast? He wasn't being recognized in public. He was still being treated like he was less than at home, and he was still the outcast at school. Most of his stories feel embellished, and it's because he tells it in such a dramatic way, and he's clearly trying to incite an emotion from the reader, but it just comes off as more insincere than anything. It's like we're getting a performance of how he wants to be portrayed rather than how things actually happened. However, there was one story in his book that really did pull at my heartstrings, and it was the only part of the book that I remember feeling like it was actually genuine. It was at the end of chapter 10. He says a pretty classmate named Jamie said that she had a surprise for him and told him to close his eyes. He closed his eyes and she dumped a cupful of spit that had been collected from like 15 other students onto his head. He says that he was most upset by her laughter, and I completely understand that. But he was so down that he went home and retrieved a gun that he had found from one of his family members and was hiding, and I guess they didn't notice. But he retrieved the gun and wanted to himself. And thankfully, he didn't have the guts to do it. And the way he recounted this story did make me feel like it was his genuine feelings. No matter how we all feel about Corey, bullying is never okay, and my heart actually went out to him in this moment. This actually wasn't Corey's first suicide attempt. His first attempt came about because he was feeling a lot of extra pressure and being told that he was failing. His mom was making him feel like he wasn't doing enough. I think everybody around him really was making him feel like he wasn't doing enough to be a good child actor. In this instance, he actually did try, and he took a handful of pills. However, he chewed them. Can you imagine chewing a handful? I think it was like just a generic pain medicine, like a Tylenol or ibuprofen. He took a handful of them and chewed them before swallowing them. If you're gonna go out, don't go out with that kind of nasty taste in your mouth. It's not funny. This is not a joking matter. Had to point that out. But what happened after they found him is a bit mind-blowing. So he was found and taken to the hospital, and everyone suspected that he had a bad appendix or his appendix burst. So they wanted to do emergency surgery. And rather than speaking up and letting the hospital staff know what had happened, he allowed his appendix surgery to happen. They took out his appendix for absolutely no reason. I know that he was trying to save face, and maybe he felt shame or embarrassment or didn't want to have that kind of headline brought on him, but that is wow. So in chapter 7, we're introduced to his Michael Jackson infatuation. He said that he was made to take a jazz class so that he could become a better dancer and book better movie roles, but he was never good at dancing. Even then, he sucked at it. But once he discovered Michael Jackson and his moves, he started mimicking him, and in his eyes, it made him a good dancer. But each one of us can decide on whether we agree with that. To me, it kind of looks like he's just trying to be a Michael Jackson impersonator. being a really good music artist and being a really good dancer would involve developing your own style, not just mimicking the style of somebody else, but that's just my opinion. He did also say that Michael Jackson gave him more confidence to express himself, and that's great. In chapter 10, he says that he tried cocaine for the first time. He found some, like, in his mom's room and tried it. And he also started smoking weed regularly. This is blamed on being at a new school and wanting to fit in. This is also when his mom started feeding him diet pills to try to make him skinnier, and he didn't like how they made him feel, so he started selling those diet pills to his classmates. The next chapter, he is introduced to Corey Haim, and the first time he heard Corey Haim's name came from a girl named Robin. Corey Feldman really liked Robin, and Robin was just talking about this guy named Corey Haim who's really great, and she likes him, so that instantly made Corey Feldman not like Corey Haim before he had even met him. Although they did develop a friendship and a career together, people say that even during that time of their friendship, Corey was always a little bit envious. When I'm talking about the two Coreys, I'm going to try to use their last names because it gets a little confusing. But Feldman didn't think he liked Haim, but Haim actually called Feldman, and they had a great conversation, and they made plans to hang out for the first time. Feldman says that he met up with Haim and they had a really great first hangout session together. Although, for my opinion, there's like red flags going up everywhere. Literally during their first hangout session, Feldman says that Haim asked him if they could mess around, and Feldman was like, no, why would I do that? But Haim said, it's a very normal thing that guys do. He says that a guy on the set of Lucas convinced Haim to have sex with him and convinced Haim that it was a very normal thing that guys did together. So when Haim met up with Corey, he wanted to do that with Corey and said, this is normal. Like, why can't we just mess around? To me, it indicates that Haim was not protected by the adults in his life to be at such a sexually developed stage at this very young age. Feldman says that he said no, they didn't do anything. He turned down his offers. This is all of Feldman's accounts. We don't have the luxury of knowing Haim's side of the story. We're just going to have to develop our own opinions. This chapter also describes Feldman's last day at Stone Ridge Prep and his last day of school period. Some of the other students were trying to put his head in the toilet, and for the first time, he fought back. He says that he never went to school again after that day, but he doesn't explain whether he graduated or if he just quit. Like, I guess it was his last day. So in the next chapter, he talks about how he was persuaded to do more cocaine. He had tried cocaine once before, but now he was trying it again because this girl convinced him to do so, and he had a really great night. But the next day, he was supposed to be filming on set of The Lost Boys 2, and his come down happened, and it made him unable to film, and he got fired that day. But he was literally rehired the next day. So he was fired, rehired. But the next chapter opens up with a very weird mention of Michael Jackson. I thought it was kind of strange the way he quoted him.
Your butt is mine. Hello? I gripped the phone receiver tight against my ear. Corey, it's Michael. Your butt is mine. What are you talking about, dude? Gonna make it right. What? Do you like those words? They're the lyrics to my new song.
Editing me here. Corey says this, but then just moves on to how he went to live with his father, so I'm still not quite sure what the point of this was, but so strange, right?
So he moves in with his dad. They start getting stoned regularly together. He lost his virginity to a girl, I think her name was Katie, but then she moved to Mexico shortly after. In the next part of that, he describes how he set Haim up with somebody that he knows. And he says that Haim was just pressuring him so hard, saying that he needs somebody to hook up with. He has some tension that he needs to release. He was begging Feldman to come up with a person that he could play with. And Feldman says that he set him up with a guy named Tony. Even though he linked these two up, he acts completely clueless about the relationship that evolved from that meeting. Around the age of 15 is when he really started experiencing fame. He was getting recognized and he started partying the proper Hollywood way. And it was this time that he started taking Quaaludes regularly. I actually don't know what a Quaalude is, so I'm going to look it up real quick. Babe, what is a Quaalude?
Quaalude is a painkiller. Darvocet family.
What's Darvocet? A painkiller?
Darvocet's an old painkiller, yeah. that what you're finding?
Well, yeah, and it says it was a hypnotic sedative.
Mm.
Gotcha. Thank you. And then he ends the chapter by telling us all that he got a BJ by a porn star. So glad that he included that. In the next part, he describes trying coke for the third time. But also for the third time, he was pressured into doing it. Like, it's not his fault. He was just so pressured that he had to. He describes a guy named Ron feeding him different concoction of pills, and he says that once he was so out of it, Ron began touching him inappropriately, but he allowed it to happen to avoid confrontation. I don't know how much I believe or how much I don't believe. It is not my place to say that that didn't happen. It very well could have. And honestly, when I was reading the book, my mind was like, not really believing a lot of these accounts. But then when I hear him talking about it in interviews later, I'm like, okay, it does kind of sound genuine. So it's not my place to say that it did or didn't happen. In Corey's own words, he says that he believes Ron could have thought that he was a willing participant because he said yes to the first time. And that's the only part that casts just a little bit of doubt on whether this was something that was done to him or something that was a shared participation. And I actually feel bad for even having that doubt. If what he says is true, that is so messed up. He is being exposed at an entirely young age and nobody is there to protect this from happening, and clearly Corey doesn't have a strong enough voice to stand up for himself yet. I believe that Ron was an adult and Corey was an adolescent, so no matter which way you look at it, it is so wrong, and gives us another glimpse at how ill-protected these young actors were on Hollywood sets. According to Feldman, he needed a break from Ron. He started staying at someone named Ralph's house, but a few days into staying with him, he woke up to Ralph on top of him. I guess Ralph was trying to do the same thing, but Corey says that he did have a voice this time, and he pushed Ron off, and he ran out of there, and he turned it down. He says that he was being groomed by Ralph and another guy named Bill Kaufman, and he sought solace in the company of Michael Jackson. There's a lot of conflicting knowledge on whether Corey Feldman has indicated Michael Jackson as being sexually abusive to him in any way. In this book, he says he wasn't. He says that every experience he had with Michael Jackson was positive. Michael was a place that he could feel safe. And any real proof of Feldman saying otherwise to me is people trying to read between the lines of his interviews. But if we are to take this book at face value, Michael Jackson was not a part of Corey Feldman's abuse in any way. It's also in this part of the book where Corey Feldman admits to being a factor in the drug use of Corey Haim, which ultimately led to his demise. So he did take a bit of responsibility, just a tiny bit, in how Haim got so into drugs in the first place. Around the age of 15, Corey Feldman gets emancipated, but he says he had to pay off his father $40,000 just to sign the emancipation paperwork. He first tries to live with his sister, Mindy, but it doesn't work out, so he moves in with his alleged abuser, Ron, where he starts partying and doing hard drugs pretty regularly. This must be when his use really amped up. He then gets an apartment of his own, which he says is because he's trying to get away from the bad influences, but the bad influences occur in his apartment as well. Nothing changes. He's still doing hard drugs. He's still partying all the time. He's having a bit of issues booking roles, but he does finally land a role as being the secondary to Corey Haim in a movie where Corey Haim is the primary. But he got too messed up and overslept for filming. He finally did land a role that would be starring him. It was his first major starring role, and he was even going to do his own song with choreography in the movie. And in this part, he actually says that he stayed at the Shell Island Resort. And I got so excited because me and my family also stayed there, and it was amazing. He says that this was his last starring role for quite a while because of his drug use. He wasn't getting booked for other roles. And he also says that Corey Haim at this time got a leg injury that he was prescribed pain medication for, and that started his lifelong journey of drugs. But he has already told us that Haim's lifelong journey on drugs was because of his own bad influence. So which was it? Was it you that introduced him to drugs? Or was it this leg injury that introduced him to drugs? Or maybe it was both. Maybe Haim introduced him to cocaine and then he was introduced to pills through the injury. I don't know. It's a little conflicting. After this is when Feldman was introduced to heroin. He tries heroin for the first time. Even this instance, he is described as being overly pressured and he didn't want to, but yet he still did. So then he goes on tour with Corey Haim, and he says that he thought the tour went really well, but then after, it starts circulating in the press how the two Coreys are constantly partying and doing drugs and just out of control. Corey literally says it was all Haim. None of it was him. All of the bad press and all that was because Haim was making bad decisions, but we already know that Corey Feldman is deep into drugs at this point, making wrong choices, so I just don't buy it. I don't think that it was all Haim's on this tour. I think that you were both partying too much and being complete menaces to society, and the press picked up on that. And like, I know the press can spin stories in a negative light and some of them aren't true, but some of it is true. So then he starts dating Drew Barrymore. He is over the age of 18 and she is only 15 years old at this time, but even this is attributed to Drew. Feldman says that Drew was so into him and just constantly trying to get with him and sending him messages and flirting so much that he finally gave in. Just another instance in our sea of examples of how his relationship with an underage girl was her fault. She may have actually been pressuring him to date her, but it was your choice to date her. So production of whatever movie he was working on wrapped up and he was left with this amazing hotel suite, and he decides to throw a big party that got out of control and it raked up a lot of, I think, monetary damages, and of course they're upset with him, but he literally responds with, "I cannot be held responsible for this," as if it's their fault for leaving him with such an amazing hotel room that he just couldn't help but throw this epic party. The movie that they had wrapped up actually performs badly. It completely flops, but he says that is because the wrong audience came to watch it. Not because it was a bad movie or anything, just because the wrong people came to see it. Him and Drew Barrymore's relationship starts to unravel, and they want to break up, but it's award season, so they agreed to make it through award season. He went on to an award show, performed with 12 other people, and apparently it was a bad performance, according to critics, and then him and Drew broke up later that night. After he breaks up with Drew, his literal next story is about meeting someone else. He meets Vanessa Marcil at a veggie shop, and she wants to be just friends, but he goes on an Australian tour and takes her with him, and the tour goes badly, but their relationship actually develops from this. They get married on a whim at the Silver Bells Wedding Chapel in Las Vegas. He decides to keep this a secret because he says he has a lot of tween fans that he needs to believe that he's still available. But I don't get that, because you just ended a relationship with Drew Barrymore and you weren't keeping that a secret. He lands a role on the film Exile. He has to go to Catalina Island to film for it, but at this time he was doing 10 bags of heroin a day. And he says that he knew he couldn't get that much on the island, so he agreed to go through detox. He says he couldn't handle rehab, and he left, and he went to stay with Ron, who again tries to force himself upon Feldman. But this time Feldman says, no, not gonna happen. He kicks him off and he runs out of there. At this time, he says he believes Vanessa is cheating on him. He even thinks that she's cheating on him with Prince. It could be true, but I also know that when you're heavily on drugs, your mind is very paranoid. So she could have been cheating on him, but he also could have just been extra paranoid. He also starts flaking on auditions and meetings. So his career's not going well. His relationship is not going well again. He starts working on Rock and Roll High School Forever. But he's in such a drug bender that he's not doing well. He's spending $300 a day on heroin and he's going broke. At this time, he gets pulled over while driving, gets caught with 25 bags of heroin, and is charged with possession and intent to sell. He went to rehab, but he was still doing drugs. He also went on a few talk shows to try to convince the world that he wasn't on drugs. He goes to another rehab called Cry Help, but he gets kicked out, and he says that's because of Vanessa. He says that she was leaving him love notes behind the building and got caught for it and got kicked out. It's hard for me to believe this one. I feel like the more likely story would be that she was leaving drugs behind the building for him, not love notes. I just don't buy that he got kicked out because she was writing him love notes, but whatever. He makes a deal with Cry Help to attend 30 meetings in 30 days so that he can get back on their good graces. But at the very end of that 30 days, he gets arrested again. He goes to another rehab called Exodus Center or something like that. And this time he actually wants to get sober, which makes a big deal. If you're going to rehab to get sober for everyone else, it doesn't work. You have to want it. So this time he actually wants it. He comes out clean and sober, but he's also broke with a bad name. Him and Vanessa broke up after a 3-year relationship, and now he wants to stay clean and start educating kids about the dangers of drug use and how to stay away from it. And this is the time where he starts writing songs as well. So the birth of his music career, I feel like, really happened here. He got an audition for a big project, but he says that he completely bombed it because he was sober. I do believe that somewhat, because I've heard other celebrities say that they had to get messed up to really perform the way that the public wanted them to, or to really perform the way that the producers wanted them to. But his movie career wasn't doing good, so he agreed to sign on to a 3-movie contract with the other Corey Haim, and he moved Corey into his house. He also moved in Tony, the guy that he had hooked Haim up with previously. Haim is actually angry at Corey for moving Tony in because Haim says Tony sexually abused him. But when we heard about how Haim and Corey's relationship started, Corey said that it was Haim that needed some sexual release and he hooked him up with Tony. So this is really confusing, and I'm just going to move on because we don't have all the facts, obviously. Unfortunately, Feldman starts popping prescription pills, and he blames that on an eye surgery and a slipped disc that he had, among other things. He also did a show called Dweebs that got canceled for being ahead of its time. If anybody's seen Dweebs, can you tell me if that's true? I'm really curious, and I don't have the time to watch it. By the end of 1995, Corey Feldman was taking 20 double-strength Vicodin a day, which he attributed to 2 failed projects and unexplained pain. I got lots of air quotes today. Sorry about that. This sent him on a complete relapse where he lost his car, his house, and his friends. A month later, he gets sober again, and he found out the unexplained pain was due to kidney stones. He decided to put together a psychedelic rock band called Truth Movement, which he says was inspired by Pink Floyd. He met a girl named Susie who was a fan at a nightclub, and they began a relationship. But this time it was a completely open relationship, and he says he feels like he was really able to be himself because there wasn't anything that was being hidden. They were able to be completely open with each other, and he felt more comfortable with this relationship. He was also approached and questioned about the accusations that had been brought upon Michael Jackson. And because Feldman was somebody that had hung out with Michael Jackson, he was being questioned. But he says he told the detective that Michael had never abused him. He said that he named the names of the people that did abuse him, and they were completely ignored. He felt like the detectives were only looking for dirt on Michael and had no interest in the real abuse that was happening. He goes to see Michael Jackson at a concert, and he's waiting for Michael Jackson backstage, but Michael doesn't come. And then he's told by someone on Michael's team that Michael Jackson is really upset with him because he heard that Feldman was saying negative things about him to other people and maybe to the press. Whether he talked negatively to anyone or not, Michael Jackson clearly was under the impression that he did, and he got completely snubbed, and Michael Jackson just wanted him out of his life. Right after that is when the Twin Towers were hit, and everybody was trying to leave town. It was really impossible to get out of town, but Michael Jackson had a bus that was leaving town, and Feldman thought that he could hitch a ride with them to leave town, but he was kicked off his bus, and he had to convince somebody on Michael's team to just let him get on the bus so that he can leave town. And they said, fine, but you cannot tell Michael that I let you on here. You can come, leave, but do not let him know that you were ever on this bus. So he did get to leave with them, but it was a big secret to Michael Jackson. Then he wrote a song about this experience called Megaloman. Michael Jackson sent him a cease and desist because of this song. He felt like the song was defamatory. Actually, now I'm really curious about this song, so I'm gonna look it up real quick.
magic so rare. You gave us reasons to care. You taught us to share.
I don't even understand why Michael Jackson sent a cease and desist. Like, that song cannot hold any kind of bearing in anyone's opinion, I don't think. Whatever, it's still available, so it must not have worked. Then he goes on to talk about his really cringy performance on the Howard Stern show. He says it was the most uncomfortable 5 minutes of his whole life, and I don't doubt that for a second, because we're all uncomfortable watching that performance. Although it happens to be one of my favorite, like, cringe pieces, because I love cringy stuff. Then he does the surreal life, which, of course, in Feldman fashion, he describes as not wanting to do, but they pressured him so hard and threw a bunch of money at him, and he did it. He also says that his portrayal on the show was completely by editing, and he wasn't actually that cringy. Sure, Corey. And apparently there's this epically bad line that came from him on that show that he also says was due to editing. He didn't actually say it like that, and the editors just made him look bad. And at the end of the surreal life, he marries Susie, and he says he didn't want to. He did it as a favor to the show, just to spice things up a bit, but he married his girlfriend. Him and Susie go on to have a baby together named Zen. They did have like a scare while she was pregnant, but the baby turned out okay, and he is a healthy boy today. And then on he goes to do a 2020 special, and he says he didn't want to. I am getting so sick of saying that. But he says he didn't want to do that. He was so persuaded, and they ended up spinning it into a Michael Jackson thing. He downplays any statements that he's ever made negatively about Michael Jackson as just being general statements, and they were taken out of context, which is kind of like what I said earlier, but I think that that was done a little bit purposely, because maybe he didn't have anything negative to say about Michael Jackson, but the spotlight was on him heavily because he had a relationship with him, and MJ was getting all of these accusations, and people were looking to Corey for answers. Otherwise, it wouldn't be an exciting interview, and some of these narratives I think he grasps onto because it keeps the spotlight on him, and I hate to make that accusation, but it's just how I feel. I'm sorry. And in the last chapter, he says that Haim was so out of control that they had to keep charcoal on hand and was actually feeding him charcoal daily to keep him from overdosing. But they landed the two Coreys, and Corey Haim actually did get cleaned up because they were both trying to revive their careers and like keep themselves in the public eye. And a great way to do that was to make the two Coreys reality TV show together. They did do 2 seasons. I tried to watch as much as I could of it, but just like the book, I really couldn't get into it. From what I did see of it, I really got the impression that Feldman had a lot of control of the narrative because he came off looking so cleaned up, great house, great woman, not doing drugs anymore, his life is all put together, and then they bring Hames in, and it's the total opposite. It's the complete opposite. But Corey says that Hames cleaned himself up for this show, so I don't know how that happened. And he just ends the book by saying him and Susie broke up in 2009. So yeah, it doesn't really end with any kind of resolution, which I guess it wouldn't. It's about a life that's still going on right now. I have a few thoughts that I want to share about the book as a whole. So as I said at the beginning, Feldman said one of his goals was to become successful without it being the two Coreys, but he introduced his book by using Corey Hames' death, and he pretty much ends it the same way. He says that when Hames died, he didn't want to speak on it at all, but he got so harassed that he just finally said, okay, fine, I'll do one interview. But he did Larry King on the literal day. I find that just a little bit twisted. I think he was maybe a little more eager than he let on. I also thought that some of the lines he delivered were just way too dramatic for what it was saying. And I spoke on that earlier. It takes away from the sincerity of what he's saying. And it's great that he's speaking out on the abuse and bullying that he endured in his life, but because of that extra dramatization, the severity of what he's saying is getting lost and the comic side of how he's saying it. So he's speaking on very serious topics, but it's just not coming off serious. It's coming off as embellished. It's coming off as a story that you created. Even if it's not, that's just the way it feels to me as a reader. He also does this thing where he ends a story with no ending. He just leaves it like, well, did something happen? Like, we're kind of left hanging on some parts. Like at the end of chapter 9, when he says that his dad asked him to come live with him, but he never says whether he did. Did he say no? Did he say yes? Did he go live there? We're just left hanging. I know he lived with his dad at some point, but in this part of the book, we were just kind of left right there. Also, when he talks about the incident where people tried to put his head in the toilet, he says, and that was the last day I ever went to school. But I was like, did you just quit school? Did you graduate? He just stops right there and moves on to the next chapter. And it's like, hello. And then lastly, he does this thing where he repeats things in a sentence. So he didn't say this, but an example would be like, my hungry brother was so hungry. It's like, you just said that twice. Pick one spot for that word. Anyway, so yeah, that's all I have for you today. I really didn't like the book. I hate to say that. I think it's great that he wrote one. That's a huge accomplishment. But it's not for everybody. Corey Feldman fans probably do enjoy reading it. And if you're one of his fans, you should check it out if you haven't already. In the later part of his life, he has become an advocate for the way children are treated on sets and productions, and he's trying to fight for the rights of child actors, and that is a huge, noble thing. Whether his intentions are actually to protect these people or to stay in the spotlight, I haven't quite figured that out yet. But either way, he is working towards something good, so I'm going to give him that. That's all I really have for you today. If you like this video, please give this video a like, leave me a comment, and subscribe. Until next time, goodbye. For those of he had it. He also said I can formulate my own. Shit. The memoir. It's a memoir. It's a memoir.